May 20th, 1941, and the island of Crete was a crucible of fire and steel. The German invasion, Operation Mercury, had unleashed thousands of Fallschirmjäger, elite paratroopers, onto the Mediterranean jewel, aiming to wrest it from Allied hands. The rugged mountains and olive groves became a slaughterhouse, where every rock hit a sniper and every path promised death. Amid this chaos, Corporal James "Jimmy" Turner, a 24-year-old British paratrooper from Bristol, found himself plummeting into a mission that would become a legend of survival. Dropped into the heart of Crete's mountains, he faced a relentless ambush that would test his courage, reflexes, and will to live. This is his story, a true war story of one man's fight through a storm of bullets, a desperate clash in a war zone where survival was a fleeting hope. Jimmy's descent was a nightmare from the start. The C-47 transport plane shuddered as flak burst around it, the sky alive with tracer rounds and smoke. He leaped into the dawn, his parachute jerking him upward before the wind caught him, tossing him like a leaf over Crete's jagged peaks. Below, the island was a mosaic of fire, German paratroopers clashing with British, Australian, and Greek defenders. His unit, part of the 2nd Parachute Battalion, was tasked with securing a mountain pass near Malmö to block German reinforcements. But as Jimmy's boots hit the rocky ground, his parachute snagging on an olive tree, he knew something was wrong. The air crackled with gunfire, closer than it should have been. His squad was scattered, their drop zone overrun. The Germans were already here, and Jimmy was alone in a trap. He cut himself free, heart pounding, and dropped into a gully, his Sten gun clutched tight. The mountains were a labyrinth of boulders and scrub, the sun already scorching the earth. Dust stung his eyes, and the stench of cordite filled his lungs. Before he could orient himself, a burst of MG-34 fire tore through the brush, shredding leaves and spitting dirt inches from his face. He flattened himself, breath shallow, as German voices barked nearby. The ambush was tight, professional. Fallschirmjäger pinning down the scattered allies with surgical precision. Jimmy's radio was useless, its wires torn in the drop. His only chance was to reach the pass, find his unit, or die trying. The war zone was alive, a beast of noise and motion, and he was its prey. He moved fast, scrambling over rocks, his boots slipping on loose shale. The mountains offered no mercy. Every step exposed him to unseen eyes. A sniper's bullet pinged off a boulder, the crack echoing like a whip. Jimmy dove behind a low wall, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. The Germans were closing in, their fire relentless, a rain of bullets that chewed the earth. He peeked out, spotting muzzle flashes in a ridge above. There were at least a dozen, maybe more, their green uniforms blending with the scrub. He fired a burst from his Sten, the guns chatter a fleeting defiance, then ran, zigzagging to avoid the answering hail of lead. A grenade exploded behind him, the blast hurling him forward, his knees scraping rock. Pain flared, but he pushed on, driven by instinct and adrenaline. The pass was half a mile away, but it might as well have been a continent. The ambush tightened, Germans flanking from both sides, their shouts mingling with the roar of gunfire. Jimmy sprinted through a dry riverbed, its banks offering fleeting cover. Bullets zipped past, one grazing his sleeve, tearing fabric, but missing flesh. He stumbled, his canteen clattering away, and dove into a cluster of boulders. The world was a blur of noise, screaming shells, rattling machine guns, the thud of boots on stone. Sweat stung his eyes, his breath ragged. He was one man against a storm, and the storm was winning. Yet, the thought of his mates, maybe still fighting at the pass, kept him moving. He wasn't ready to die on this rock. A new threat emerged. A German Stuka screamed overhead, its dive bomb shaking the earth. The explosion tore a nearby hill, raining dirt and shrapnel. Jimmy pressed himself into the ground, his body trembling as the plane circled for another run. The distraction gave him a chance. He bolted, legs burning, toward a narrow gorge that led to the pass. The gorge was a death trap, steep walls, no cover, but it was his only path. As he ran, a German squad appeared at the gorge's mouth, their rifles raised. Jimmy fired on the move, his Sten's rounds scattering them, but more were coming. He ducked into the gorge, the walls closing around him, amplifying the chaos. Bullets ricocheted, sparking off stone, each one a heartbeat from ending him. The gorge was a gauntlet. Germans pursued, their boots echoing behind, while others fired from the ridges above. Jimmy's ammunition was low, his Sten coughing its last rounds. He switched to his pistol, a meager defense against the onslaught. A bullet clipped his helmet, the impact jarring his skull, but he kept running, his vision tunneling. The pass was close. He could see its rocky outline through the dust. But the Germans were relentless. Their fire, a torrent that seemed to bend the air. A grenade rolled into the gorge, its hiss a death knell. Jimmy threw himself behind a rock, the explosion deafening, shards of stone cutting his hands. He was trapped, outnumbered, outgunned. Despair clawed at him, but surrender wasn't an option. He'd fight until his last breath. Then, a miracle in the chaos. Allied artillery, likely from Mallarmé's defenders, opened up, shells slamming into the ridges above. The German fire faltered as dust and smoke choked the gorge. Jimmy seized the moment, sprinting the final yards to the pass. His lungs burned, his body screamed, but he ran, bullets still chasing him. He burst into the pass, collapsing behind a sandbagged outpost where British and Australian troops held the line. "Friendly!" he gasped, hands raised as rifles swung toward him. A grizzled sergeant pulled him to safety, eyes wide. "You ran through that?" he muttered. Jimmy nodded, too exhausted to speak. He'd made it, against all odds, delivering himself to the fight that still raged. Jimmy's war didn't end in Crete. He fought on, evacuated when the island fell, and survived the war, returning to Bristol in 1945. He died in 1992, his story preserved in letters and battalion records. The Battle of Crete was a German victory, but men like Jimmy turned its mountains into a crucible of defiance. Paratroopers faced impossible odds, and some, through sheer will, emerged from the bullet rain. His clash in the ambush was no myth. Such moments defined Crete's chaos, where survival was a triumph. In a war zone that devoured hope, one paratrooper outran death itself. What does Jimmy's story mean to you? Crete's mountains were a graveyard, but they also forged tales of unbreakable resolve. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which true war story you want to hear next. Subscribe to True War Story for more authentic war narratives that thrust you into the heart of history's deadliest battles.